Be sure to come out to New York Comic Con. There you can hang out with myself and the rest of the guys at the Weekly Pull and talk to us directly. So continuing my series on comic book concepts, what I want to do here is have a discussion about the optic beams of Cyclops. Now, in his original appearance, the optic beams of Cyclops were not given any real explanation of how they worked or what they were composed of, aside from the simple offering of Uncanny X-Men number 43, which stated that he was capable of shooting a concussive force from his eyes, and did so by absorbing sunlight and other forms of energy. Whether or not this was due to the fact that Jack Kirby and Stan Lee intended to emphasize the nature of their characters over their powers is unknown, but because the early stories were less than favorable and sold low relative to the rest of Marvel's lineup, it would stand to reason that Marvel was simply trying to keep the title afloat without expanding too much on existing information. As a result, the first tried and true information about the origin of his optic beams and how they emerged came with X-Men Origins Cyclops in 2010 from Stuart Moore by way of both Chris Claremont and Howard Mackie. What I mean here is that coming out of the conclusion of the Dark Phoenix saga and the first death of Jean Grey, because Claremont had spent a majority of the issues expanding on both Jean Grey and the Summers line, the Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas saw Claremont reintroducing the character of Christopher Summers as the father of Cyclops, as well as retconning the entirety of Cyclops' backstory in order to fit in with Claremont's vision of the series. However, with Claremont glossing over the reason for why Cyclops' powers were activated, where fans took the mention of a childhood trauma as absolute fact owing to Claremont being the sole X-Men writer with no information forthcoming, in 1999, during Astonishing X-Men Volume 2, Howard Mackie rehashed Claremont's information with very little expansion, serving as part of the 12 crossover event which centered on Apocalypse capturing 12 mutants, who according to the precognitive mutant destiny would allow Apocalypse to remake the universe. Astonishing X-Men Volume 2 functioned as a 3-issue limited run during the 12's lead-up and saw Professor Xavier disbanding the X-Men. While the 12 would reveal that this was done in Xavier's effort to root out an imposter who turned out to be a Skrull masquerading as Wolverine, because Marvel sought to capitalize on the release of X-Men Origins Wolverine, the X-Men Origins line of comics quite literally consolidated all existing information on the X-Men characters, providing a bit of reworking for the modern reader. What we're told is that after the plane of Cyclops' parents was attacked by a scout ship of the Shi'ar Empire, leading to Scott and his brother Havoc escaping with a parachute, during the landing, Cyclops had hit his head. While his powers didn't immediately manifest, instead, Scott experienced the symptoms of a headache, including slight nausea and irritation. However, with the federal government homing in on the signal of the Shi'ar vessel and tracing it to its source, Scott and Alex were discovered, leading to the two of them being separated and placed in foster care. Were this tied into the origin of Cyclops regarding Mr. Sinister's experiments? At some point following his 17th birthday, his optic beam suddenly manifested, blowing a hole in the wall of the orphanage, after which he escaped and almost immediately ran into Charles Xavier. Now, following this and wrapping back around to the original series as it had been written by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, the early depictions of his optic beams were largely weak in that his optic blasts were capable of knocking powerful foes back. While this remained the standard during both the runs of Stan Lee and Roy Thomas, during the era of Chris Claremont, the optic beams of Cyclops were expanded on in great detail. Covered in various stories over the course of Uncanny X-Men issues 12, 124, 144, 152, and 170 among others, during his 17 years on the title, Claremont established that instead of simply emitting a constant flow of energy, Cyclops' beams could be adjusted in both width and intensity, allowing for a more spread out blast, as well as being confined to a singular beam, allowing for a more concentrated blast. In addition to this, with X-Men Manifest Destiny centering on the team shifting their headquarters from Westchester to San Francisco, as part of the story, writer Mike Carey established that Cyclops' eyes are portals to another dimension filled with energy. Tying into Claremont's writing, this meant that the intensity of Cyclops' blasts were limited to the amount of energy that can escape through his eyes, as well as the calibration of his visor. To this end, Cyclops is not affected by his own energy blast by either impact or recoil, and the blasts themselves do not actually emit heat. Now, whether this is a result of his own physiology is a question that I don't have the answer to. But I think I've heard it mentioned that the insides of his eyelids function as a mirror of sorts, keeping the energies from blasting through his eyelids, which explains why the optic beams disappear when his eyes are closed. Now, to sidetrack for a second and wind back to the Visor of Cyclops, this artifact is both a crutch and a savior to his optic blasts. Designed by Charles Xavier following his first encounter with Scott, the visor's exterior is composed of a thermoplastic polymer capable of withstanding temperatures up to 221 degrees Fahrenheit. Within the visor rests a series of ruby quartz plates designed to disrupt the optic blast of Cyclops and are operated using twin motors controlled by a pressure switch, with the plates moving in an upward direction, allowing the beams to pass through based on the pressure of Cyclops' finger, meaning that the harder he presses, the more the plates open. However, the visor itself does have a redundant system, in that with the plates remaining in the closed position unless the switch is activated, should the visor be damaged, Cyclops can keep it on without fear of his optic beams blasting through. Furthermore, while the switch of the visor itself was originally used as Scout's primary method of using his beams, as technology progressed, his suit was outfitted with pressure switches in the thumbs, allowing him to activate the visor without actually touching it. That said, and getting back to his optic beams, with the late 80s and early 90s seeing Marvel Comics enter a high-octane and fast-paced era of storytelling, the X-Men, like all of Marvel's titles, were adjusted to reflect this change. As a result, and under the writing of Louise Simonson following the launch of X-Factor, the intensity of Cyclops' optic beams was upgraded to include the capability of slicing mountains in half and piercing the Hulk's skin, as well as focusing itself into a beam concentrated enough to punch a hole through most any material, with the exception of adamantium, Uru metal, the organic metal skin of Colossus, and Captain America's shield. At the same time, the optic beams of Cyclops do come with several drawbacks. Covered in Howard Mackey's astonishing X-Men, where the late 90s saw Marvel attempting to revamp some of their characters in an effort to drive sales with new concepts, Howard Mackey established that Cyclops' inability to control his optic beams was entirely psychological, and that through the use of his visor, he had literally come to believe that control of the beams was beyond his ability. Where this allowed Mackey to begin moving Cyclops in the direction of being able to function without ruby quartz, because the visor was as much an intricate part of his character, if not a staple, he was quickly restored to the status quo. Furthermore, in addition to the materials of adamantium, Uru metal, the organic metal skin of Colossus, and Captain America's shield being able to withstand his blasts, certain mutants also possess powers or modifications that hinder the power of Cyclops' beams. Where Apocalypse, Havoc, and Vulcan all stand as the most commonly cited examples due to Apocalypse's conflicts in the X-Men cartoon show of the 90s, Havoc being the brother of Cyclops and the two being able to negate each other's powers, as well as Vulcan being able to control all forms of energy including Cyclops' optic beams, Magneto presents a challenge as well, due to his control over magnetism allowing him to invoke the electromagnetic spectrum to defuse Cyclops' blasts. In addition to this, because the energy of Cyclops' blast is part and parcel to himself in that it provides a portion of sustenance, if he were to use the totality of his energy, it could potentially be fatal. However, as it was stated during the Civil War conflict, Cyclops has never actually used the full offering of energy available to him. As far as I'm aware, the closest Cyclops has ever come to cutting loose in this capacity came during X-Men Adventures number 9 in 1993, when he blasted the Juggernaut with enough energy to destroy a small planet, but had no effect. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end, and if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can follow with my comic book concept series every Friday, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.